Today we're going to continue on with the aftermath of the Syrian crisis and talk about the intellectual possibilities that could take place from this point on. If you watched my last video, you know that this basically has turned out simply about the way I figured it would. Not because I'm some type of genius or something of that nature, but because I basically, like I said before, that most prophecy experts fall short of giving good analysis because they simply don't look at good, valid intelligence. Many of them base their knowledge on tabloid-type newspaper articles that I also sometimes reference, but the bulk of my intelligence gathering is from places like Foreign Policy Magazine or Stratford, Debka-File, sometimes Debka-File, because they're a little bit on the tabloid side at times as well. And I also believe that we are still living in a natural world. In other words, we're living in a world that is pre-life in giving in marriage and also doing the natural things of life. In other words, we are pre-sudden destruction. So for the most part, we have to look at things as if we are pre-sudden destruction. Now, I think things will turn very supernatural once sudden destruction strikes. But up until that point, I don't see anything crazy going on, other than the fact that the rapture could take place. That basically will be a part of pre-sudden destruction. That will be a supernatural event. But once the rapture takes place, that you should look for at any time after that things start to go very supernatural. Good basic intelligence will no longer matter. But up until that day comes, I will continue to seek the best sources for intelligence and for what is available out there. Now, as many of you know, the President Barack Obama was looking to try to build a coalition last week with the British, the French, and possibly Germany or a number of other European nations. But one by one, the dominoes begin to fall. First came the UK, and now there's been rumors that Mr. Cameron, will try to seek a second election, or should I say, a second vote on this issue. But the bottom line is that his own party didn't even vote for it. So that probably won't take place anytime soon anyway. In fact, Stratford says that it's highly unlikely that the British will get involved in this airstrike. Now, as far as France is concerned, France is looking to see what Britain's going to do, as well as Germany, and they'll come in. They may follow suit as they can. Now, France would like to see an intervention, but the bottom line is that without the other two, Britain and Germany on board, they're probably going to play a support role for the United States at best. But they also are going to take a wait-and-see attitude. Now, Germany, on the other hand, Miss Merkel is in the middle of a re-election and absolutely does not want to get involved in an intervention when elections are in about 20 days. This intervention is very unpopular in Germany, and most of the country is against it. So that's simply not something that she wants to be bringing up in the closing days of her election. So friction within the three major European nations, and likely will be in the United States as well, has caused a major problem. In fact, this is what Stratford says in the articles. This is forcing Europe's largest economic and military powers to strike a difficult balance between giving political support to the United States in order to preserve their relationship with the White House and avoiding direct involvement so that they do not have to pay the price at home. As a result, EU members are likely to support the United States by offering intelligence reports, negotiating with Russia, and providing diplomatic pressure on Syria, but the assistance is likely to be more political than military. Without a prospect that the European crisis will end in the short to medium term, I'm not talking about the economic crisis, this dilemma will become increasingly difficult to solve for European governments. It also means that Washington will find it increasingly difficult to rely on EU members to build international coalitions to deal with military actions in the future. And as I said in my last report, this also could send a message to Russia and Iran and Syria and the other Islamic nations that will come down upon Israel, that this is exactly the way it's going to be in the future. When Russia comes down to take a spoil from Israel, many of the nations that I just mentioned, the big three plus the United States, will protest, but they will not come to Israel's aid. And it's stated in this last paragraph that I referenced, the United States is going to find it very difficult to bring the big three back into any type of alliance in the future, and that will not bode well for Israel at all. Because I can't see the United States coming to Israel's aid on their own without the backing and the support of the British, the French, and the Germans. That's why the Bible is clear in Ezekiel 30 and 39 that many nations will protest, but none will come to their aid. And if anything is leading up to, in this Syria intervention, it's this. I believe that it has little less to do about the fall of Damascus into a heap of rubble, and more to do with what will happen in the future, which is the West not coming to Israel's aid. This simply is setting a precedent for that big battle to take place. But before many of you start thinking that Russia and Syria are buddies, don't think for 1 minute that if the United States does stage an intervention that Russia's coming to their aid. They're not. In fact, in many analysis, it basically says that Russia is simply using Syria as a pawn to further their interest against the United States. Because lately, or in the past, the United States has used the Baltic states, some of the former Soviet states, to gain influence in the region away from Russia. So Russia is only too delighted to rub salt in the wound when it comes to Syria and also Iran. As I said, don't think for a second that Russia is a friend of either of those two nations. Russia is the big dog, and they basically are using these two countries to get back at the United States. And both Syria and Iran are more than willing to be used. Now, speaking of Iran, this article of the New York Times, and I'll give you the reference to it, but the bottom line is you can't get to it unless you have a paid subscription. So I will just have to give you some of the information. It says, drawing a line on Syria, U.S. keeps eye on Iran policy. It says, as the Obama administration makes a case for punitive airstrikes on the Syrian government, its strongest card in the view of some supporters of a military response may be the need to send a message to another country, Iran. If the United States does not enforce its self-imposed red line on Syria's use of chemical weapons, this thinking goes, Iran will smell weakness and press ahead more boldly in its quest for nuclear weapons. And that goes for Russia and Syria and other nations who may be seeking nuclear weapons or whatever they can, to push the United States. Not all these countries are pursuing any type of weapons system, but the bottom line is that they will smell the weakness of the United States and take it to a new level because they don't believe the United States will respond because of the American people or whatever the case may be, or because they're allies for that matter. Now, certainly NATO was developed to have each other's back, but it seems like that the voting process of whether to get involved in an intervention or whatever the case may be has gotten in the way. So simply put, not everybody's on board when it comes to NATO. Going on with the article, it says, but that message may be clashing with a simultaneous effort by American officials to explore dialogue with Iran's moderate new president, Hassan Rouhani, in the latest expression of Washington's long struggle to balance toughness with diplomacy in its relations with a longtime adversary. Two recent diplomatic ventures have raised speculation about a possible back channel between Washington and Tehran. Last week, Jeffrey Feltman, a high State Department official in President Obama's first term, who is now a senior envoy at the United Nations, visited Iran to meet with the new foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, and discuss possible reactions to an American airstrike in Syria. This has led some to believe that a deal may very well be in the making between the United States and Iran to allow the U.S. to bomb Syria, more or less a slap on the hand, without affecting backroom talks with Iran. Now, Stratford goes on to say that one thing is clear, the statements by Iran's leaders have shifted from earlier this year, when high-ranking Iranian officials said a foreign attack on Syria would be treated as an attack on Iran itself. There may even be some relief as to the prospect of more direct American involvement in the Syrian conflict, which has occasionally been cast as Iran's Vietnam, some analysts have said. The reality is that Obama's military action will make the Syrian tragedy his and not Iran's, wrote Farhad, an Iranian scholar at the University of Hawaii, in an analysis published online by Globalog.com. And in Iran's post-election environment, in which the country has moved toward national reconciliation, both among the elite and between the government and the population, nothing suits the Islamic Republic better than divesting itself from this issue quietly. So even Iran is taking a different stance on the Syrian war, and if indeed solid proof comes out that Syria did use chemical weapons, Iran, who is trying to make amends with the West, may have to walk away from Syria. The article goes on to say that for all their differences between the United States and Iran may ultimately find common ground in Syria. The United States and Iran are fighting a zero-sum proxy war in Syria at the moment, said Karim Sajapour, an Iranian analyst at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. If and when Assad falls, the two sides will have a mutual adversary in radical Sunni jihadists. Now, whether or not that fall of Assad is imminent is still yet to be seen. And I'll say it myself that it is a bit puzzling why he would use chemical weapons, especially when he knew that that was a red line that the West would have to deal with. But I'm sure those reasons will come out in the future. But strategy-wise, it simply doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now. But that's a report I have for you today, direct and to the point without all the hype. And I hope that by now we've learned one thing, and that is just because somebody hypes something up doesn't make us any closer to the rapture of the church. The rapture of the church is going to come when the rapture of the church comes. We can turn this Syria experience into World War III, which many people have done. But we're not any closer to seeing the Lord come through the sky for the rapture of the church than we were. So if you're one of those who are looking for catastrophes to spark the rapture of the church, you're looking in the wrong spot. It is most likely that the rapture will take place on a normal day when you are doing normal activities, and could happen on any one of the 365 days in a year. Could it happen on a feast day? Sure it could. Could it happen on Valentine's Day? Yeah, it could happen then too. Well, how about 4th of July? Yeah, it could happen then as well. And when it does happen, you need to be ready. The Bible says that it's appointed on a man once to die, then the judgment. But you know what? There's going to be a generation that's not going to die. There's going to be a generation that is going to be raptured from this world into the next. And I believe that we are living in that generation. But for those who have to suffer through the tribulation period, you're probably going to face death. And when you do, you're going to face God. And if you don't die and you do take the mark of the beast, you're going to have to still face God. Either way, you're going to get judged. And when you are, you're eventually going to be cast alive into the lake of fire for an eternity. You know, 150,000 people die every single day. All of them die with their sins paid for. But very few of them take up that gift and actually embrace it. Don't be one of those who have refused the gift of God, and that is that Jesus died for your sins. Accept Jesus as Savior today. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.